moving house is a big change of circumstances.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realise how much work goes into buying a property.
And the local authority search, what sort of things come up in that?
There could be a local church in the area that you are required to contribute towards maintenance and repair of. So
That's pretty horrific,
yeah.
seeing as most churches are really old.
If you are aware of Japanese Knotweed, you have to disclose it.
Yeah, because basically the badgers have rights, don't
Yeah,
they?
yeah.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Hello. Today I'm going to be speaking to Jodie from our residential conveyancing team. Jodie has a great reputation within our firm and within her client base for providing an efficient and cheerful service when clients are looking to move house. Hello Jodie, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So I've seen you at work many times at your desk. You're always in the office. You're always available to speak to clients and agents. How do you keep so calm?
I think it's, having a great support in a team as well as having sort of the knowledge there that everyone's got. Just knowing that I need to be the calm person in the transaction when clients are stressed moving house. Obviously, they say it's one of the most stressful things you can do in life. So we're there to be the calm person. So if you're worried or anxious, we're that person there that's sort of says it's going to be okay. We'll sort out any issues or get you moved as quickly as possible, really. Provided
that the property is a property that they should be buying, because that's the difficult thing, isn't it? If you come up against a problem and then you have to say to the client, well, we can't just exchange contracts without this vital piece of information.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes it's difficult for clients to understand what the issue is, but that's what we're here for, to explain it so they understand, we have to solve this issue. Otherwise, it's just going to come up when you come to sell. That's the main thing we try to, obviously, we don't want issues in conveyancing anyway, but it's all about when you come to sell in the future, we want to have had everything in place for you.
Yeah.
So that when you come to sell, hopefully it's smooth sailing and all goes through quickly.
It's such a good point, because of course people are buying a home to live in.
Yeah.
But they're also paying a huge amount of money and usually borrowing a huge amount of money as well. And then if they come to sell and they can't get that money, it's awful.
Exactly. And I think because people don't see that money they're putting in, because it comes from a lender, they don't necessarily see the big investment that they're making in a property. And if it's sort of their dream home, they want to move in straight away. But you've got to iron out any issues before you go ahead so that you don't come up against it when you come to sell in the future.
No, and I think that, people have a survey, don't they, on the whole? Yeah. Which points out if the property's falling down or going to need major repairs. So people are prepared to spend money on a survey, but then they have to also bear in mind that if the legal aspect of it is no good, then it might look like a wonderful house, but actually if someone's got the right to come in and, I don't know, sit in your garden every day without asking permission, that's probably a silly example. I'm sure you've got better examples of why.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's not always just about the condition of the property. There's, things such as rights of way. Some properties might have a shared driveway, rear access ways that they need to access the property. And we're there to check that those rights are there so you don't come up against an issue in the future where you don't have a right to access your back garden or to your property over the driveway. So, all various things that don't just depend on whether an extension was built correctly or if there's damp or anything like that in the property.
So we all know that we have to get searches when we buy a property, but I know that there's a whole series of searches, one of them involving a church nearby.
Yes, so chancel repair liability is where there could be a local church in the area that you are required to contribute towards maintenance and repair of. So
that's pretty horrific, seeing as most churches are really old.
Yeah, definitely. Our search pack actually includes a chancel repair indemnity policy to cover if any liability was requested from you from the church. So that's part of our standard pack that we provide.
Yeah. So you find out if the church that the house or property is nearby has one of those rights to request contribution, and then you have the indemnity cover to make sure they don't come knocking at your door asking, can you pay for their new roof?
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. And the local authority search, what sort of things come up in that?
So the main things in a local authority search are, the good thing about a local authority search is it is specific to the property you're buying. So the environmental search is more of the area, but the local search is specific to that property. So it will show things like planning permissions, building regulations for any works that have been carried out, which doesn't necessarily just have to mean like a big extension. It could be when a boiler was installed, when windows were installed. It also gives information as to whether the property is on a public highway, so if it's maintained by the local authority, or if it's a private road that's sort of repaired by everyone that lives in the road. Any enforcement notices that might have been issued by the local authority for breach of planning conditions.
So if there was one of those enforcement notice and you bought the property, could that enforcement notice be imposed upon you as the new buyer?
Yes, so enforcement notices follow with the property. So until that notice is complied with, it will follow to every owner of that property until it's resolved. So,
which is pretty scary.
Yeah,
definitely. So how would you deal with that for somebody?
It doesn't often come up, but when you do have an enforcement notice, if I was acting for the purchaser of the property, we'd obviously raise inquiries of the seller's solicitor to contact the council to find out what the enforcement notice relates to. And we wouldn't advise any buyer to proceed with an enforcement notice still remaining on the property.
Yeah.
So it would be for the seller's solicitor and the seller and the local authority to liaise with each other to obviously
get it removed
yes. or resolve the issue before we go ahead.
And I mean, it might be that somebody goes and finds a lovely, I don't know, country cottage that they want to buy, and it's got a beautiful tree or set of trees in the back garden, but actually they really don't want all those trees because they want to build a summer house in that back garden.
Yeah.
And if it's got a tree preservation order, for example, what does that actually mean?
So so a local search will reveal if there's any tree preservation orders, which basically means that there could be trees located within the vicinity of the property that you aren't allowed to basically touch without local authority permission. That involves cutting them, like felling them, not just removing the tree. You have to get permission for anything you do with regards to that tree. And the tree preservation order will set out the conditions, and it also has a plan attached which shows you the location of the trees, so you would know which ones you needed to get authority for before you did anything to them.
And talking back gardens, is there such a thing if there's a badger set in the back garden?
Yes, so there's rules and regulations that you can't just remove a badger set in the garden. It's really important if you're selling a property with a badger set that you are open and honest about the situation, if you've had any correspondence with anyone about the badger set being in the garden, and also if we're acting for someone buying a property with a badger set in the garden, we will raise all those inquiries of the seller solicitors to get as much information as we can for you, so you can then make a decision on how you want to proceed.
Yeah, because basically the badgers have rights, don't they?
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Sticking on the subject of gardens and properties with gardens, well, perhaps not necessarily gardens, but anything outside space-wise, there's the Japanese knotweed situation, which is a particular type of plant that does something to properties.
Yeah, so again, it doesn't come up particularly often, but it can be a big problem. It spreads fast. It's one of those things that you need to be aware of. It can affect structural movement of a property. So again, if a property does have Japanese knotweed, usually there would be a treatment plan in place for it. So we would need to check that was in place, obviously how long it's been treated for, how long it's got left of being treated before it will be eradicated from the property. And that's another major point for mortgage lenders as well, because we need to make sure that plan is in place, notify the lender of the situation, and then they will give us their authority to either proceed or for further information on that.
So tempting as it is to hope that if you're selling a property, your buyer doesn't notice Japanese knotweed. And years ago, it used to actually be that way, that it was all at the risk of the buyer to find out things. There is an absolute duty now, isn't there? Yeah,
it's just a question in the property information form that you'd fill out at the outset. So if you are aware of Japanese knotweed, you have to disclose it at the time you sell the property.
Similarly, that estate agents' particulars have to be accurate now, don't they? So again, when we're acting for sellers, I know, it's crucial that we encourage them to read everything about the property they're selling that's been put to the buyers to make sure it's open and truthful. And even if it's a problem, that we know about it as early as possible to try and help them get over the problem.
Definitely. And if people are unsure how to answer a question, because some people don't necessarily know how much they have to disclose, so always come to us, explain the situation, and we would advise you, to be open and honest about as much as you can, because it was far worse afterwards, isn't it?
Exactly. Whereas before they exchange contracts, we can get indemnity policies, or you might get a buyer who's prepared to take on that risk.
Yes, and they're taking it on aware of what it is. So yeah.
Because otherwise they can come after you
exactly
later. You mentioned mortgage lenders earlier, and of course, majority of people buy with a mortgage. And the lender wants to know from us, the solicitor, that it's a good deal, a good property for them to have as their security.
Yeah. We have a lender's handbook, which we refer to. Every lender is on there because they all have different requirements. And that's another thing that people don't necessarily realise when they're buying a property. Not every mortgage lender has the same requirements. We often have to check if certain things need to be reported to them or they don't, because some lenders want it reported, some aren't as bothered to have it. So it's a lot of work involved ensuring we also comply with lenders' requirements and not just the buyer who's purchasing the property.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's quite an accolade that we're on the number of lenders panels that we are.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
If somebody gets a mortgage from a lesser known lender, it's important that they contact us to let us know who that lender is, because if we're not on that panel, we can apply to be so, can't
exactly.
we? So that we're approved by that lender. Yeah. Otherwise, they have to go and pay more legal fees for another legal opinion.
Yeah, someone who is on that panel to act for the mortgage lender, which can incur additional costs.
Yeah, and I know that we together and the whole team are accredited under the Law Society's Conveyancing Quality Scheme, CQS, and that's quite arduous, an accreditation to renew every year, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the training is brilliant. It's, it sort of tells you what you already know, but gives additional things for you to think about, and it's great for the whole team to do. So it's not just necessarily someone who's working on the file as a conveyancer. It's good knowledge for the whole team, really.
Yeah, and then the accreditation proves that knowledge.
Exactly.
Which, I mean, I know I was amazed just how much complexity there is around stamp duty, for example, mixed use, if you have a second property. Yeah. But of course, all of that information, don't you?
Exactly. So obviously there'll be complex situations where we can't determine the amount of stamp duty, and you have to get in touch with a stamp duty advisor. But we have the government guidance, so we can obviously check examples if it's something that's unclear. And we would obviously advise you, if we're not certain of what the stamp duty would be, that you should seek advice just to avoid any complications or issues in the future.
Yeah. And so the exchange of contracts is the point at which there's no going back, really, for the clients. And I know a lot of people moan about how slow the conveyancing process can be. But I know from overhearing you speaking on the phone to clients, people do have sometimes a bit of doubt. Oh, shall we go ahead? I'm not sure about this. Sometimes they don't always want it to go through as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, we're here to give you the advice on the legalities of buying a property, the issues that may arise or have come up in the searches, things like that. But again, it's also to do with having your survey carried out, making sure you're happy with the condition of the property, and any concerns raised with your surveyor, or obviously come to us and we can advise you what to do next.
Yeah.
So.
And then you have the exchange of contracts, at which point the date for actually moving house
yes,
or
and
home.
everyone hopefully breathes a sigh of relief that they know what their moving date is, and they can actually get organised with removals and cancelling utilities and things
sometimes
like that.
Exchange of contracts, which is of course you do, can involve quite a few phone calls, can't it?
Yes.
Because what actually has to happen?
So depending on the size of the chain, you would take what's called a release of contract. So say you've got 3 people in the chain, obviously you need to make sure that their sale and purchase is exchanging at the same time. you don't want to leave them open to the risk of
being homeless.
Sold their property and not be able to
or
move
I suppose
in.
even worse than being homeless, committing to buy a property without the money from the sale.
Exactly. So, yes, we do what's called a release of contracts to make sure that the whole chain is and will be exchanging essentially at the same time to make sure that everyone has secured the property that they're moving to.
And on the exchange is when the date for the actual completion is fixed?
Yes, so you can't exchange contracts until a completion date is agreed, and then once the chain's agreed that completion date, you exchange, you date the contract as at the date you exchange with the completion date in there as well, and then everyone knows that everyone's tied in to complete on that completion date agreed.
Yeah, and then on the actual date of, then in between exchange of contracts and completion, there's more forms for clients to sign, I suppose.
Yes, so we have the stamp duty land tax form, so they have to check through that, make sure they're happy with the stamp duty amount that we're paying, and the information in the form is as it should be. And then we also send them a completion statement, which will obviously detail what they've paid in, what we've paid out, and what's due to complete, or if there's any money going back to them at the end of the transaction.
And obviously we do that as soon as possible because it has to be cleared funds by the time it comes to completion. And then the day of completion happens, the client is very happily goes and collects their keys, but we still have work to do after that.
Yes, exactly. So we still have to submit our application to the land registry, submit the stamp duty, and get everything to the land registry so that they can update the title to show them as the new owner of the property.
And we put the mortgage details on there as well.
That's
if there is one.
Yeah. So if they've got a mortgage, we'll register the charge against the title, so the lender's details are noted on there as well.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of work, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And I think, a lot of people don't realise how much work goes into buying a property because there's so much going on in the background that clients don't know about and don't necessarily need to know the ins and outs of it, but aware that it's actually happening. So
yeah, and I know you always do this, but you always emphasise to clients that moving house is a big change of circumstances. Owning, even subject to mortgage, and such an expensive asset. Normally they should look at their will.
Yeah,
they should look at who they allow to move in there with them and on what basis.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's the thing as well. We don't just look at the property; it's their personal circumstances. Is one person putting in more money than the other? Then they should look at protecting their contributions and, like you say, their wills, updating their wills to confirm, who, if something was to happen to them, who their part of the property would pass to. So.
Yeah. Yes. Well, such a lot, and that's why you're so well respected through our firm and wider in the work that you do. Thanks so much, Jodie, for coming in and chatting with me today. That's been great.
Perfect. Thanks.